So yeah, again, my name's James. Today I'm going to be talking about Howler. How many of you have used or know about Howler? Okay, cool. So basically what I want to do is start off with a quick background on Howler, sort of how it got started, and go through some demos, some different use cases. I guess I should say that Howler is an audio library for the web, and it started as just for games, as I'll go through, but there's a lot of other use cases for it, and so I want to walk through some of those. We'll go through some live code, and then I want to wrap it up by sort of talking a little bit about where the library is headed, and how I'm trying to get the community more involved with that. So yeah, again, my name's James. I'm the author of Howler.js. I'm also the founder of Goldfire Studios, which is a game development studio here in OKC. We're just a couple blocks down that way in downtown, and we build massively multiplayer online games using JavaScript. So stuff like WebGL, Canvas, Node on the server, things of that nature. So browser audio is a challenge, and that's where Howler came from. It's definitely gotten a lot better since Howler was first released, which has been, I think it's about 5 years old now. So the browsers have changed a lot in that time. The audio support has improved a lot in that time, but it's still a challenge for these reasons here. So one is fragmented support. This is the one that's definitely improved the most. So when I first wrote Howler, maybe about half of your users would have web audio support. And so there's the two specs. There's HTML5 audio and web audio, and we're going to go over the differences between those. But so Howler, the idea with Howler was to default to web audio and then fall back to HTML5 audio, just because web audio has a lot of advantages, especially when you need more high precision audio support. Today, pretty much, well, everything your users are going to be using support web audio other than Internet Explorer, which just continues to refuse to die, unfortunately. But Howler will support that, i.e. 9+ for you with HTML5 audio support. The codec support is also fragmented. This hasn't really changed a whole lot. If you want to have full browser support, you're going to need to have at least two different file types for your audio files. And so that's another thing that Howler makes easy for you. You just provide the two files. It's going to pick the one that works for that specific browser automatically. And unlike with HTML5 audio, it doesn't have to download both of the files to do that. As I mentioned, there's HTML5 audio and web audio. Again, I'm going to go through some code between the two of those to show the difference. But basically, the basic idea of Howler's core is that it fully covers the HTML5 audio spec using web audio, and then it'll fall back to HTML5 audio when it's not supported. However, there are legitimate use cases for HTML5 audio, and I'll go over those a little bit. So, it's easy to specify that you want to use HTML5 audio if your use case requires it. Mobile is another area that's an issue. This is another one that's improved a lot. So like when Howler was first released on iOS, for example, if you wanted to play a sound with HTML5 audio, it couldn't do it in the browser. It would open the music player to play the audio file. So that wasn't very good. It had web audio support, which is what Howler used on mobile, but it had all sorts of issues with that. That's all improved a lot since then, both on iOS and Android. There's still a lot of different little bugs and things you'll encounter that Howler, sort of hides all of that away and fixes those for you. Another one that used to be just a mobile issue and has become pretty much everywhere now, after some issues that Chrome had in the last year, the autoplay policy is now present. It just became present on Firefox, I think about a month ago, and it's on Chrome and Safari And so I would assume Edge will follow. Well, Edge is changing to Chromium, so I assume that'll follow soon as well. Howler automatically will unlock the audio for you. Basically, the autoplay policy is a user has to perform an action like a click on the page before you can play any audio. The problem is Chrome rolled this out without actually adding an API to be able to detect if the audio is unlocked. And sometimes it can be unlocked without a user interaction just from their algorithms, and there's no way to know that this is the case. So there are APIs in the works, and unfortunately they just didn't release them before they released autoplay change. So as soon as those are available, those will be in Howler, but Howler does as well as possible to smooth that out for you. So a little background, Howler was started, like I said, I think about 5 years ago. So we were working on a browser game, and we needed, obviously audio is important for games, and the audio engine we were, the game engine we were using didn't have audio support, which seems a little odd, but so we sort of assumed, this couldn't be too big of a challenge. So I made it sort of a weekend project and wrote the first version of Howler, which was super basic, but it just did what we needed. And we threw it up on GitHub. You know, a couple days later, it shot to #1 on Hacker News. And then now here we are today, and Howler is the most widely used audio library on the web. So it's blown us away with all the community support. It's been really awesome. We've had over 100 contributors. Over 50 that helped just on Howler 2. And so, as I'll talk about at the end, that's going to be the focus of driving Howler forward into its next steps. But so, basically the idea with Howler 2, was to totally rewrite the library from the ground up. Basically, there were a lot of assumptions in the first version that didn't necessarily pan out to where things had shifted to based on how people were using the library. And so we just went back to the drawing board with the idea of making Howler more of an audio engine rather than just a utility. So instead of just being simply about playing and pausing audio and basic things like that, we wanted to enable it to do a whole range of other things that are possible with web audio. Now, if you just want to use it as a simple audio utility, it's still perfectly simple to do that as well. But so yeah, in Howler 2, the big thing that was being added for this was plugin support. And that's the idea of turning it into an audio engine where you know, the core is still just the HTML5 audio spec through web audio, but then you can plug in other features that are supported with the web audio. They give you a lot of extra features. So the default plugin is the spatial audio plugin, which lets you do 3D sound, stereo panning, things like that. But there's room for a whole lot of other things, which I'll talk about later as well. We simplified the API, so it's now centered around sort of 3 levels, just to simplify organizing your audio. So there's Howler, which is the global scope. You can mute or pause or stop or things like that on you know, all of the sounds globally. There's a howl, which is a group of sounds. That's where you'll do most of your work. You initialize a howl, and then you can play individual sounds that are owned by that group. So if you call something on that group, you can pause the group, change the volume, fade it out, things like that. Or you can control individual sounds as well. Another important part is audio sprite support. And that was in there from day one, but it was sort of tacked on. And the idea, if you don't know what an audio sprite is, it's basically like a CSS image sprite where all of your sound files are put into one, and then you can sort of splice it up. And the demo is going to show that working. But so Howler 2 basically redid this, made it the core of the library. So everything is a sprite now internally. Doesn't affect anything with you using it, but it just solved a lot of issues and simplified the whole process. We also added a bunch of helper methods, events, things like that, basically covering all of the options you could want for basic playback that weren't there in the first version. And then it's also mostly backwards compatible with 1.0. There was a few small changes, but I wanted to keep it, even though it was a total rewrite, there had already been a lot of apps and websites and whatnot using Howler, and I didn't want to just break all of those. So there was just a few minor breaking changes that were easy to update. Okay, so now I want to go over a couple code samples. Hopefully you all can see that. Is it legible? Yeah, good enough? Okay. So yeah, first I want to go over HTML5 audio and then show the differences with web audio and then Howler. So HTML5 audio actually has a really nice simple API, but there's some drawbacks as I'll go over. So for just a simple example, we just want to play a sound. So we set up our audio node, and then we give it the source. In this case, we're just going to load an MP3 file, and then we can do some basic things like set the volume, and then obviously play it. But I've outlined 4 issues with this that may or may not impact your usage of audio. The first one is that you've got sort of limited control, at least compared to web audio. So it's pretty much play, pause, mute, and seek. If you need to do some more advanced things, you really need web audio to do those. Cross-browser support is an issue, as I mentioned, with the different codecs. You'll actually need to, if you're just using straight HTML5 audio, you'll actually need to load both of your sound files to get full support, or you'll have to write a code that will detect the supported audio on that browser and select that one, which if you're going to do that, you might as well use Howler because that's what it does. Third, it's not performant enough for sound effects. So not that it's going to slow down your web page, but it doesn't have precise timing. So if you need to, for example, line up audio playback with animations or things like that, it's generally not going to work very well with HTML5 audio, but you can do that really, really well with web audio. And then, yeah, as I said, mobile support, still not great with HTML5 audio. Again, it's gotten a lot better, but web audio definitely performs better on mobile these days.
Why do you want to splice up your audio file?
So, well, a couple of reasons. So one is you can just do one request for the file, and it gets all of your sound effects. Also, just from a simplicity standpoint, it's nice to, yeah, it's all packaged into one, and you can just play back. And I'll show an example of that. It makes it really easy to play all the sounds that you want. So this is the same thing with web audio. Like I said, web audio is a lot more powerful, but it's also a lot more complex. So I'll just go through this real quick. We start out by making a new audio context, which is your global source. Basically, that's what you're connecting to the speakers to make the to hear the output. Then you need to create a gain node, which is what you control the volume with and other aspects. Whereas before we just said audio.volume, here the equivalent is gain node.gain.value equals 1, or whatever volume you want to set. And then we need to load the buffer. So this is another important difference between web audio and HTML5 audio. So HTML5 audio can actually stream the audio. So like if you've got a large audio file, background music, for example, you're probably going to want to use HTML5 audio still because it'll start playing pretty quickly. Web audio, as you'll see here in my load buffer function, it has to load all of the audio data through an XHR request and then decode that in the browser before it can play it back. So it depends on your use case. So again, here we're setting up our XHR request. We want an array buffer, and then when it loads, we call decode audio data on the XHR response, which gives us the buffer. And then we create a buffer source from the global context, and then we set that buffer to the buffer source, and then we connect that to the gain node, which is then connecting to the context and the speakers. And then finally, after we've done all of that, we can call start on the buffer to begin playback. So this is doing the exact same as this in just a lot more code. Well, actually, it's doing something completely different, but as far as loading the files. But effectively, if you just want to play a simple sound, you've got to go through all of that with web audio. Any questions on that? Okay, so here's using Howler, and we're actually doing quite a bit more here with Howler. But this first one, we're just setting up a new Howl, and as I said, that's effectively a group in Howler, but that's where you're going to begin all of your playback from. And so we're passing in both a WebM file and an MP3 file. Like I said, Howler will select the audio file that's correct for whatever browser your user is loading your website or app from, and only use that one. And I recommend defaulting to WebM and then using MP3 as your fallback. WebM's got a good mixture of quality and compression. MP3 is pretty low quality, but it's good. It's good as a fallback. So then we're also defining our sprite here. So in Howler, you just define it as an object. You can name each of your sound files, and then it's just an array with the first element is the start position in the audio file, and then the second one is the duration. So that just sort of maps out your audio file, and then you can play each of those individually. And then I decided to add a little more here. So we're also going to have background music. So we're loading our, again, same way, theme.webm, theme.mp3. This time we're setting HTML5 to true because it's a larger background music. We don't need the specific timing. We want it to start playing right away. So HTML5 audio is better suited in that instance. And then we also tell it to loop. So then all we need to do, now we can play our sound effects, and you just pass in the sprite name and it'll play it back. You can play as many of those as you want. Howler will automatically handle pooling of the audio nodes and things like that. And then we can also play our theme music here. Now I will just say with the, yeah?
I was going to ask a question about spriting. Does Howler handle creating the sprite, or is there a separate program?
Yeah, so, oh, sorry. So the question was, does Howler handle creating the sprites, or is there another program for that? There's a couple other programs for that. Howler doesn't, that's sort of out of the scope of the library. I'm actually going to show one in the live code demo and show creating one. So yeah, when we first made Howler, we were just making the sprites manually in Audacity, which is a pain. So yeah, now it's all automated with some nice tooling. One other thing I wanted to point out here, if you just ran this code exactly like this on your page, it wouldn't actually do anything because of the autoplay policy. So you would want to wrap those play commands, depending on what kind of app it is, you'd want to wrap those with a click handler or something of that nature, unless it's a mobile app, for example, in something like Cordova, then you can disable the autoplay policy, and that's not an issue. Okay, any other questions on that? Yeah.
For the source array, is the order in which it's put in the order checks for support, or rather than
Yeah, so the question is with the source array, if the order matters. Yeah, so it's ordered by priority. So if you want to default to WebM, you should put the WebM first. Basically, it's just going to go through the list and find the first one that is supported by the browser. Anything else? Yeah? Yeah, so the question was, will it play all of these at the same time? Yeah. So there's events, like if you wanted to chain them, you could just call play and then on end and play the next one, or however you wanted to structure that. But so you can play as many sound effects as you want on top of each other, and you'll see that in some of the demos. All right. So yeah, I'm just going to go over some demos of other companies that have used Howler in projects. These are just a few, which has just been cool to see. I think the moment when I knew that Howler was sort of taking off is when I got an email from NASA asking for help with a project they were working on with Howler. So that was pretty cool. Fortunately, I did not get to see what that project was, so I can't demo it. Okay, so here's the Howler website. There's a couple demos on there, so I'll just show those first. And you can go to the website. It's Howler.js.com. All the code's on there, so you can pull these demos down and do whatever you want with them. So first one, basic music player. So you can click around, seek, pause, all of that. It's got the you can track the progress of the playback. Let's see. Change the volume. So pretty basic music player support. It also supports live streaming audio. So these are this is a live feed of CNN.
Democratic voters or they're swing voters, independent voters? It's a relatively small universe.
So, for example, those use the HTML5 audio. So if you want to do streaming audio, you need to set HTML5 to true, and then it's able to stream that live. This visualizes the audio sprite support. So this is the waveform of a sprite file, and it's always a good idea to add, well, we like to default to a minimum of a second silence between each sound. That's really a fallback for HTML5 audio not being as precise. It's not really as necessary anymore, but it doesn't hurt to have that in there. So if you click on these, and you can spam it, and they'll call on top of each other. And this is a demo of the spatial audio. It probably won't work in here, but if you had headphones on, where you see the lightning, you'll hear it in that direction. If you spin around near these speakers, you'll hear the audio go around you. And as you get closer to them, they will get louder and whatnot. So you can control all of that in quite a bit of depth, actually. Obviously, that's ideal for game support. Okay.
Have you had a chance to play with Magenta?
I'm not familiar with that.
Basically it's a machine learning based music art tool.
Oh, okay.
Runs through TensorFlow.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. What did you say it was called? Magenta?
Magenta. Might go well with this.
Yeah, well, and that's something I'll be talking about with plugin support, which could be interesting. Yeah, thanks. So this is Melon.js, which is a game engine. It's not one that we use, but they've used Howler as their audio engine, I think pretty much from the beginning. And they just have a little fun little demo on their site. Yeah, it's not very good, but so yeah, another game demo. So this one is totally different. This is a music notation learning site. I'm not a music person, so I'm not 100% sure, but I believe this is a unique form of music notation. And so you can change stuff and then play it back and hear the notes. So this was from the Peanuts movie a couple years ago. You can hear the background music. There's my mouse. There's little, I don't know if you can hear them, but there's little UI sounds going on. Snoopy let himself go there. So yeah, it's nice to be able to add in just little simple sound effects that just make a web app feel a little more native. Here's a pretty popular I/O web game. Let's see if it'll connect. Might not. Nope. All right, well, that one's not working, but basically you got little tanks running around and it's got the spatial audio set up and all of that. Let's see if the next one works. This one is our newest game, actually. Okay, there we go. So this one's got the spatial audio set up as well. And so actually each of those crystals that just animated, each one had its own sound playing, and so you know, it can support quite a bit. And if you want to check that out, it's called Exocraft. It's at exocraft.io. All right, so okay. So yeah, those were just some various demos of projects that are using Howler. There's a bunch more. If you go to Howler.js.com, we've got a showcase page that has, I don't know, at least 100 websites on there. There's a bunch of apps and things like that as well on phones and desktop and websites, of course, as well. So you can check all those out. So now I'd like to do a live code demo.
For the phones, does it play better on Android versus iPhone, or just Android?
So the question is if there's a difference between iOS and Android as far as the playback. Not if you're using Howler. There's definitely differences, and there's differences in the implementation, and there's different bugs on each one. But the community has done a really good job tracking those down, and so we've got fixes in the library over years and years of usage to take care of those. Which is another reason why it's, you know, even if you're doing something simple, you're still going to run into issues if you're just trying to write the code directly, because you will then have to account for all of those differences. Okay, so is that visible at all? Maybe if let me try a light color. Can you all see that? Okay. So how many of you are all familiar with Electron? Okay, so if you're not, it basically lets you, it bundles Chromium and lets you create desktop applications using JavaScript, Node, things like that. So I thought I'd do a demo with Electron to show that you can use Howler for desktop applications in addition to websites. And so what I put together is just super simple. It's a Pomodoro timer. Let me show it here. Oops. Okay, so it's just a little task. Just a little task manager application. Obviously, a Pomodoro is 25 minutes, but I figured we wouldn't want to wait for that. But a Pomodoro timer is sort of boring if there's no audio. It just sort of counts down. You don't even know it finishes. So I figured we could add some audio to that. So just real quick, this part doesn't really matter that much, but just to go over, if you can even see it. But basically, we just got our HTML file here that has the DOM elements for our start button and the countdown. The main.js file is pretty much your boilerplate Electron main.js with support for what is it? A tray icon application. So, you know, if you want to do something with Electron, that's not what this talk is about. So I'm not going to really go over that code. But if you download their starter, this is basically it. So the main logic of our application is here in the index file. Basically, we're getting the reference to our DOM elements. Then we're setting up a click handler on our start button and just telling it to jump forward by 10 seconds and then count down. And so we're doing the countdown with request animation frame. So there's obviously different ways to do that. I make games, so I like having a loop. And so in here, we're just checking if there's time left, and based on that, how much time is left, we render the output. So that's where we're going to add some sound effects. We want to add a ticking sound as each second goes by, and then a sound at the completion. So the first thing we need to do is add Howler to our project. You can just get it on NPM. I've already added it here. The latest version is 2.1.1. And then obviously you'll just NPM install that. And then you can just import Howler into your project. Howler exports two namespaces, Howler, which is for global control, as I mentioned, and How. We're not going to do any global control with this, so we can just grab How. Oops. Yep. All right. And then we want to set up our How object. So our audio sprite is what we're going to use, and we'll create that here in a second. So set up Howler audio sprite. And we're just going to call that audio. And we just do new How. And we're going to give it a source, which we'll add here in a second. And then we're going to give it a sprite as well, which we'll define shortly. But we'll go ahead and add the names here. So again, it's just an object, and you name each one, and you give it an array with the starting position and the duration, which we don't have calculated just yet. So, complete. Okay, so as I mentioned, there's tooling to generate these audio sprites for you. So let's see, there it is. So one of them is called Audio Sprite. It's on NPM, and it's got full support for Howler. So it's just a command line tool that you can pass the audio files you want into it. It's going to, by default, there's a bunch of configuration options, but generally the default is pretty good. It's going to add in those 1 second buffers. It'll let you specify which outputs you want and things of that nature. Make that a little bigger. Okay, so we've got our sounds here, which I've already generated them, but I'll just generate them again. So we've got a complete.wave and a tick.wave. So first thing, we need to install Audio Sprite globally. That'll give it to us on the command line. And then basically we want to export to WebM and MP3. Oops. Tell it to format Howler. As you can see, the autocomplete already has it there. So it supports a couple different libraries, but you just tell it to format for Howler. And then we want to export to sounds, so that'll give us sounds.webm and sounds.mp3. And then we pass it just whatever audio files you want as part of that. So we run that. Now what it's done is generated the sounds.json file, which you can see there. Actually, they still need to update. The URLs there is still on Howler 1.0 format, but the important thing is it gives you the sprite definition here. So you can see the tick starts at 0, and then it's got this crazy number as the duration. So we'll actually just pass that right into our configuration. And then obviously it spit out the sounds.webm and sounds.mp3. Any questions on that? Okay. So for our source, we're going to tell it to use sounds/sounds.webm and sounds/sounds.mp3. And let's see. Okay, so here's our output for the tick. We'll just copy these values. So tick starts at 0, and about 200, what is that, 85 milliseconds. And then complete starts at 2000. As you can see, it added in, it went up to the next second, and then it added a second onto that for the buffer. Okay, so we now have our HAL defined, and we can now use this to play audio. So the first thing we want to do is start playing our tick. So I'm just going to look at the difference between the HTML here. So let's just cache this inner HTML value. This is where it's updating the counter. So we don't want it to run on every tick. We just want it to run every second. And this is going to run 60 times per second. So we'll just look at if the HTML is not equal to that. And then all we need to do now is audio.play tick. Okay, so let's try that, see if that's working. Maybe. Okay. Don't know if it's the speaker or if it's this. Oh, that's the wrong. Let's see. Audio.play tick. Okay. Not sure if the audio. Let me check something here. See if the audio. Oops. Is it still working? It's the one fun thing with it. Oh no, okay, it is working. Okay, let's try this again. Here's the fun part with live coding. Sound/sounds.webm. Oh, there it is. Yep. Okay, let's try that again. Always a typo. Okay. There we go. A little delay to those projectors, but just imagine it's synced up correctly. Okay, so that's close, but it's still a little anticlimactic with no sound at the end. So we still need to play our complete sound, which we just do here in the else when it switches back to the start button. Yeah. Let's see, did I name that one correctly? Yeah. Okay. All right, now let's try that one more time. All right. And the dramatic 10-second countdown. Perfect. All right, now we can play some Mario, and I think that was Mario dying actually, so I don't know if that's the best for a break time, but it works. Okay, so that's pretty much it for that. Pretty straightforward. Any questions on how I set any of that up? Or
So is this all based off of importing sound files, or can you tie into maybe system sound or even make like a synthetic sound?
So the question is it all loading sounds, or can you tie into other sources? So at the moment, it's all loading sounds, but there's the ability with web audio to have other sources, and so that could be something that's coming next. So.
Is that something a plugin could actually do?
Yeah.
Is it ambitious enough, or is that something we'd have to fix?
Yeah, a plugin could do that. It just hasn't been done yet. Yeah.
How would you like manage like multiple channels?
So you can do that with the spatial audio. Our current plugin doesn't really have support for that. So the spatial audio, the current spatial audio plugin, basically you give it positions and it does everything automatically. Howler does also support the Dolby audio format. So, depending on your use case, you can use that. for different channels and whatnot. But there's definitely, that's another area where a more advanced plugin could add additional functionality like that.
Boards that you can buy.
Are there what?
Like boards, like some kind of like, I don't know what you want to call it, like a mixer board. Yeah,
oh, right.
Mixer thing or whatever they, I don't know what you put in the computer these days, but
Yeah.
in the old days you could put things in.
Yeah, nothing's going in this little skinny thing. Yeah, probably. I'm not as up to speed on the hardware side of things, but yeah. Okay. Any other questions about the demo? Okay. So yeah, future of Howler.js. So as I've said, web audio is really powerful. It's really a full audio engine. You can do a whole lot with it. And so that's where Howler expands to. There's obviously still a place for HTML5 audio, so that will remain as the core. But so Howler.js introduced plugins. The problem is it's not super straightforward how to set up a plugin. It's not a very simple process, which is why there's currently very few plugins. So the next step for Howler is to really overhaul that entire plugin system. And that's sort of what's in the work right now, to make it a lot easier for the community to contribute. The community has contributed a couple plugins like filters and compression and a couple other things like that. None of them have been merged into the core just yet because of how that system is just not streamlined very well. So that's what's in the pipeline. Just to give an idea of some areas that plugins can be added. As we said, more advanced spatial audio. There's a whole lot more you can do with spatial audio within web audio. There's all sorts of filters and effects that you can apply. Those are fantastic for plugins. Audio generation, so that could be another source. You can also pull from like a microphone or different things like that. So those could be other areas where plugins could add additional functionality. Advanced crossfading, visualizations, which I think someone had mentioned. You can actually extract a whole lot of data about the audio out of web audio and then use that to create all sorts of interesting visualizations. And there's actually a lot of libraries that do things like that. And so my hope is to be able to make the plugin system streamlined enough to where you could actually plug in those other libraries to then output, Howler into visualizer library or different things like that. And that's just a small sampling. If anyone's looked at the web audio spec and managed to not just have your eyes roll back in your head, it's a massive, massive document. There's so much stuff in there. And we're currently just sort of barely scratching the surface about what you can do with audio in the browser. So yeah, that's the talk. You can check out more about Howler at howler.js.com. And obviously it's on GitHub and NPM as well. You can find out more about my company at goldfirestudios.com. And I'm on Twitter at Goldfire Studios. So thanks everyone. I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has anything else. All right, thanks.